For part 2 of this month's health check, we're continuing our conversation with Dr. Lori Gledhill about summer safety tips. Dr. Gledhill, thank you so much for sitting down with us again.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So the first question that I do want to ask you is about bugs. Obviously, ticks, insects this time of year can be a big thing, especially here in the Mid-Ohio Valley. So how can people, especially parents for their kids, prevent that, prevent illnesses and ticks and mosquito bites, different types of things like that?
Absolutely. First, you want to work with an insect repellent that is EPA approved, and be sure to use it per the instructions on the container.
Right.
Also, you want to wear protective clothing, things with long sleeves and long pants. And if you're going out where it's grassy or wooded, you may want to tuck those pants into the socks to add a little more protection. Yes, and you want to go out when bugs are not prevalent. So you want to avoid dusk and dawn because that's when mosquitoes are more out. And if you're hiking on the trails, you may want to stay to the center of the trails because the outside of the trails is where the ticks are more prevalent.
Okay, and so now I want to turn our attention to the teen age group. Oftentimes during summers, they're on summer break, a lot more freedom, a lot more unsupervised time by their parents. What are some safety tips for this age group, maybe when it comes to them going to the pool or maybe doing other activities, whether it's playing sports outside, staying hydrated? What are some safety tips?
Definitely first we want to have regular check-ins with our teens when they're out and about, and it might be a good idea to get them to share their location on their electronics because they're carrying a cell phone with them.
Right.
And then we want to be open and honest about risk that they could encounter and have open discussions about things like drugs, alcohol, vaping, and peer pressure. And then we also want to talk about things like online safety. Keeping things private, not sharing too much, and avoiding scams and inappropriate content.
Absolutely. And so we're still talking about teens here. How can parents talk to their kids about, driving? Obviously, teen driving over the summer, at one point in life, I got that license. I'm a May birthday. It was right before the summer. So you want to be driving that car all the time, meeting up with your friends and doing fun things. But they also talk about, from Memorial Day weekend to Labor Day weekend, it's the 100 deadliest days of summer due to vehicle crashes involving teens. And it's dangerous sometimes out there on the road.
Absolutely.
So how can parents, approach their children and have those conversations to help them be safe on the roadways?
Well, definitely we want to start with an open conversation and allow them to make some choices. Don't make it a lecture because they won't pay attention to that.
Right.
You want to, however, set limitations and boundaries and expectations. You want to maybe make some rules about you're not going to drive after this time, you can only have one non-family member in the car, or no using the phone while driving, and that includes using hands-free options. And lastly, that you may want to set things down on paper using a parent-teen agreement, which is available on websites like the CDC or AAA, and making that a more formal agreement.
Right. And so I heard you talk about a little bit earlier, distractions of driving, the phone. I want to turn our attention to screen time and social media. Obviously, over the summer, kids' heads aren't in the books as much because school's out, and they're spending a lot more time on that phone scrolling, whether it's X, formerly Twitter, or Facebook, or Instagram, Snapchat, all the different social media apps. What advice do you give to parents to maybe talk to their kids to get them outside a little bit more and maybe not get their mental health maybe affected by spending too much time on the phone, on the screen, being too locked in on maybe not the most important things?
Definitely the screens are having a negative effect on a lot of our teens. Studies do show that teens that spend 4 or more hours on their electronics have more anxiety and depression.
Okay.
And that using social media apps can lead to more isolation and low self-esteem, especially in our teen girls. And that being on the screens leads to more sleep disruptions, which can fuel things like mood destabilization, decreased concentration, and anxiety. But not all the screen stuff is bad, because using social media and messaging apps, teens can stay in touch with their friends over the summer. They can access creative outlets and e-learning, and they can access mental health resources on that.
Right.
However, it's good if they could put that down and go outside and play a bit.
Absolutely. Who doesn't love to get outside and enjoy some, real social activity?
Get
not
in
just
the dirt.
Absolutely. Not just being on the phone and texting and playing games all the time. But one final question I do have for you. We're going to change our attention to the older adults. Any of our viewers out there that might be watching that are a little bit older, this one's for you. So for people that have chronic conditions like COPD or heart issues, how can they get outside and enjoy the summer heat and the joys that it brings to people?
Well, definitely want to pay attention to the heat and focus your activities at times when it's cooler, like early in the morning and late in the evening. Try to avoid being out between 10 and 4 because that's peak heat.
Right.
When you are out and about, pay attention to how you feel and take breaks often. Go into the shade or a cooler area as needed. And with everybody, make sure you stay well hydrated.
Perfect. Well, Dr. Gledhill, thank you so much for your wealth of knowledge that you've shared with us over the last 2 weeks. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, when we return Mid-Ohio Valley, we'll have one last look at your forecast. Stay with us.